This is MJ. I love comics, and right now I want to talk about Captain America #1. Now, if you've been following me, I'll make this quick. I've been going through Amazing Fantasy and the first few issues of The Amazing Spider-Man. But given the fact that Spider-Man crosses over so much with the other Marvel heroes, and that while all the books were ongoing, they kind of link with each other, and that I'm a madman, I kind of want to go back and I've decided I'm going to look at Captain America, and I don't know how much of Captain America I'm going to read, maybe just a couple issues, but I wanted to look at those and review them because Cap starts in 1941 when he was still part of Timely Comics, or was it Atlas? I can't remember. Anyway, and then Marvel turned into Marvel Comics somewhere in the later 50s, I think. I'm not a comic historian, so I do not know that. But there's different eras. There's the gold, the silver, the bronze, whatever, of comics, and I don't quite know. I kind of think this Cap is golden age, but he might be silver, because I don't really know the distinctions that well. But anyway, I wanted to check out what Atlas was doing before, and I know this same Cap, is basically going to come into the Marvel Universe at some point. I mean, he's an Avenger, and the Avengers is running in 63 or 64, and Spider-Man Amazing Fantasy 15 debuted in 62. Of course, that's Spider-Man's debut was in 62. Amazing Fantasy had been running for a few years before then, I believe, to get all the way up to 15, because I think it was not a monthly magazine, but like every other month, but it was also an anthology, so the stories were shorter, so maybe it was monthly. Basically, I don't know, but I want to dive into Marvel Comics history a little bit more, and I want to capture the milieu of all the books. So I'm going to read Cap this week. Next week I'm going to go with Fantastic Four issue 1, and then if whatever is next, whatever happened to be next, like whatever month Fantastic Four came out, if Strange, if like whatever Tales came out the next month, I'll be reading that, and I'm going to kind of go like that until I catch up to where I was with Spider-Man, and then I'll keep going, and I'll kind of be keeping track of the whole Marvel Universe as it goes, week by week, reviewing different things, so I can get a feel for what it was like to be a fan at those times, if you had enough scratch to be keeping up with all the comics, because I think it's interesting, and I think they were doing something unique, and gosh, I'm really excited about it. So, spoiler alert, I loved this. It was great. I had such a good time, and I would definitely read more of it. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this propaganda piece written by Joe Simon, drawn by Jack Kirby. I do not know who the letterer was. The letterer is not credited here. Perhaps Kirby did the lettering, but like I said, I do not know. The first issue of Captain America was 50 big pages, and it's interesting because what happened was supposedly this was made as propaganda, like I suggested, in order to help influence the United States to get involved in World War II. I do not remember when the Holocaust was happening, but Jack King Kirby is a man of Jewish descent. I don't know how. I don't know from what country his parents immigrated. But they were Jews, and I believe they had some sort of connection to other European Jews, and they heard about the terrible things that were happening to their fellow Jews in Germany, and I believe Joe Simon is actually Jewish as well, and the two of them wanted to make something that would really show and highlight the wickedness of the Germans, and specifically the Fuhrer and the Nazis, so that people would feel a little more comfortable about going in there and fighting them. The U.S. had to be pulled into World War II, and that's a long, complicated history that I will not get into, but makes for an awesome cover with Cap decking Hitler, which is a lot of fun. So, anyway, that's the main cover, and then there's these other covers, these like interior covers between the different stories, and I think they do a really good job of communicating the threat of the Germans, of the Nazis, and something I find really interesting is how inhuman some of these Nazi guys get to be. The guy with the chessboard, he looks like a creature. He does not look human, and that is effective propaganda. I don't like dehumanizing, or I guess, yeah, you would say dehumanizing other people, because that's what's happened today with the alt-right and the alt-light and the Richard Spencers and all these different people in the world, that people say, oh, you can just go around punching Nazis, which I think is all bunk. Uh, and the Red Skull also has a great splash page that introduces him in the story that he's going to be in. And he looks a little apish, which is weird, but I suppose it makes sense because, spoiler alert, that Red Skull is a mask, not his actual face. And I don't know if somewhere later on in the comics he's going to come back and then have that, turn into his face or what. But anyway, definitely super dynamic looking stuff, very exciting. And I'm going to drop the other things and just get into highlighting some of my favorite panels, some of my favorite elements of the issue. Actually, I'm going to talk about the negative stuff first, because while Jack Kirby's a very talented man, his style developed. He wasn't doing, so this is from 41, he was not doing Fantastic Four #1, which came out in late 61, I think, until 20 years later. So it'll be interesting to see in my reviewing what 20 years of development does to this man's talent. So we get this glimpse of Agent X-13, who I believe they, turned into Peggy Carter in like the movies. And she is at a store which sells, I think, antiques, and she's pretending to be an old woman. She peels off this mask to reveal a beautiful young woman. It was interesting to me that the design of her face is very appealing. The young woman face, and the contrast between the old woman face that she's peeling off is pretty good. I really liked the way the old woman looked. She had kind of this gnarled look, and the contrast is really good to go from such an old woman to a young soft tight skinned beautiful young woman. And I did like that contrast, so I'm not gonna say anything bad about that. It's just the way it's presented is a little off-putting. Like, you almost can't tell, you can't see enough of her face to see that she's beautiful. And I think, I don't know, just positioning it differently or framing it differently would have been a little bit better. But then again, the way it's shown really does show that the mask is peeling off. So, I mean, that was effective there. Bucky at times looks too old and too young. His face is either cherubic and baby-like, or it looks like that of an old man scrunched onto a child's body and head, and it just doesn't quite work in a lot of scenes. And like maybe half of the scenes it doesn't look that good. And then something I found interesting is that I don't know where Cap's mask is supposed to fall. The shape of his head does not lean or lend itself well to that mask being as short as it is. The way it comes down, it looks very uncomfortable, very, I don't know, almost, it just looks lame, like a bad cosplay. It's not refined into the great shape that we would have, or that we're used to seeing now. And then the feathers on his head, they change size. Sometimes they're really long and wispy. Sometimes they're very short and wispy. Sometimes they look kind of like, ear hair or something. I feel like I'm looking at Bernie Sanders. I was waiting for Cap to tell me that, he was going to give us Medicare for all. But, yeah, it's interesting. Just the shape of his face, again, sometimes feels very inconsistent, and it might be how heavily shadowed parts of his face are. Although I do appreciate the use of the heavy and dark shadows throughout this comic, and throughout a lot of the older comics that I've been looking at. I think it's very effective, and it's very creative. And I don't know that they were saving money by doing that. I think it was actually just part of the art. They were enriching the detail and making it look as good as they could. So I've mentioned that this book is propaganda. It was made as propaganda. At least that's the general understanding that I have of it. And I talked about how effective it is because it shows the Germans or the Nazi sympathizers as inhuman and very much deserving of death, if not great bodily injury, which Captain America and Bucky deliver in beautiful fashion. But I think it could also be used as propaganda for today. In the year of our Lord 2019, the week that this is being published, there was a mother in Texas, I believe, who had an 11-year-old daughter and her husband being attacked by two invaders who had handguns. She pulled out her AR-15, or her husband's AR-15, from the bedroom, and while pregnant, was able to fend them off. She killed one of them, and the other one survived, was arrested, etc., etc. Now, that really is interesting to me. I think it's a great thing that this woman was able to use her this weapon that was in the home in order to protect herself and her husband and her child and her unborn child. Because it's very possible those gunmen, those burglars, could have murdered the lot of them, and that would have been really terrible, and everybody would have cried and said, so on and so forth. And it is thanks to that AR-15 that the and the Second Amendment that they were able to have that gun, and the fact that it's Texas and they have a certain culture. Now, this being 1941, and this comic being about war and soldiers and military people, we get to see X-13, the agent who I think was later turned into Peggy Carter, and the wife of somebody murdered by Red Skull, who was a general, both exercise the use of the Second Amendment. And they happily, easily, without comment, the fact that they're women doing it, pull out firearms and use them to try to fend off attacking evil Nazi thugs. One of them is the guy who destroys the Captain America, or the I can't remember, the super soldier serum, and et cetera, et cetera. He kills the researcher who developed a formula that turned Steve Rogers into Captain America. He starts attacking. He's a plant by the Germans. He starts attacking, and X-13 whips out her pistol that she's allowed to have, or whatever. Of course she's allowed to have it. Every American is allowed to have it. Anyway, she whips out her pistol. She attacks this guy. She fails, but it's okay. Cap ends up getting the guy, and it gives our hero his big action scene. His big first action scene, proving himself. But then again, this general gets murdered by the Red Skull, and his wife comes from the other room, the other side of the house, because she heard a commotion, and she's got her gun in hand. And when she fails to fight off Red Skull, but it's a very interesting scene, and it made me wonder. It gave me pause, because it framed women in comic books in a very interesting way. Again, this is the 1940s. It's 1941, and it shows X-13, a fully trained agent who is trusted by the military, by the FBI, I believe, to carry out duties as an agent. She's fully armed and equipped to do all sorts of good works for the state, and especially in this time of war. And then you've got the general's wife, who is a civilian. We don't know that she has any military background, but she is ready, willing, and able to utilize this weapon in defense of her home, in defense of her husband, potentially. She tries to do that. Of course, Red Skull's already murdered him, and then he easily dispatches her. But I think if you... Anyway, I defend it because it's a comic, and I think if you saw somebody in a ski mask versus somebody in a Red Skull mask, it might throw you off a little and give them an opportunity, especially if you saw your dead loved one there, for them to get the drop on you. So I just think it's very interesting, and especially in light of what just happened with this lady in Texas. And I just wanted to bring that up because maybe that could be propaganda for today. I mentioned that we get to see Cap take down the Nazi filth. I'll just lean into it, man. He takes down that rat Nazi that infiltrates the project and kills the scientist and all that stuff. I think is it Dr. Reinstein? Is that who it is? Anyway, he fights him off. He's shirtless. He's jumping into action right away after he's been transformed. Very cool that he can use his muscles and has some fighting ability. But I think it's just that he's so strong he can just wallop the guy. But the way that it's drawn, the way that it's shown, is fantastic. It's so fluid, and the use of, I don't know what these white trace lines are called, or white action lines that are called, or these white action lines, I don't know what they're actually called, but the use of them is so very effective in this comic. It communicates the speed, the force of what's going on, and it also does an excellent job of communicating motion. We even get some scenes where you see 2 or 3 actions that have happened, and I wonder, when Cap gets his round shield and starts throwing that thing around, how will that affect how will the use of those white lines be utilized there? I'm imagining that it'll be fantastic, and we'll get to see it ricocheting all over the place, and it'll look really amazing. I'm going to revisit the dehumanization of these Nazis a little bit more. There's some really weird things that they do. You know, there's this one guy with a chessboard where he jumps it over and then he sends people to go assassinate things. The way he's drawn is very inhuman, and it makes him, less likable or whatever. But not only and he's kind of shown his decrepit, he's got this cane, but he's able to fight. And these guys are really shown to be formidable. One of them pulls a knife on Bucky. And by the way, Kirby's drawing on that guy. Part of like his the left side of his butt and like his thigh are in shadow, and then his right, like from his calf down or knee down, are in shadow. And the way he's spread, he's got a knife ready to pull. He's got Bucky by the throat, and just the dynamism in that little drawing there is so powerful and so impactful. These guys really do look formidable. And then we get to see Red Skull. He has a list of 5 people that he wants to kill. He puts Cap and Bucky on there, which kind of tickled me. I don't know why. But anyway, he gets in people's faces. He's got these, green eyes set in these dark pits of blackness around, or, that are inset in his Red Skull mask. And he is so threatening and so intimidating looking. And we get to see him kill these 2 guys at least. And we get to see other Nazis succeed in murdering people all over the place in these comics. So, and actually he caused the death of a pilot earlier in the issue that Red Skull's introduced in. And these guys get to be a deadly serious threat, and it's impressive. So I think the fact that they're so deadly and they are shown to be so powerful and formidable, especially to the common man, and they're representative of what, the German nation could do to the United States. And several people, I think one person in each issue, like the main guy, makes reference to the fact that he will be ruling America and be the dictator over America once it is defeated by the Fuhrer. And all that being said, all that stuff sets the stage for these extremely cathartic and powerful moments of impact where you get to see Bucky and Cap, mostly Cap. Cap's doing the most damage. He's dealing, he's super strong and stuff. Bucky, I don't know how the heck Bucky is keeping up with Cap. Can't run as fast because he's smaller, and he's also not, a super soldier, and he's not as strong, and he's just a kid, and somehow he's a boy mascot to this military platoon, brigade, whatever, and none of that stuff makes sense. But that's okay because it's interesting and it's dynamic, and we get to see how the 2 of them are able to attack different situations together, and that's pretty neat. Anyway, the cathartic moments of impact. There's this great one where he punches this guy in a red suit. He gives him an uppercut, and then that guy's head flies into the head or into the chin of a guy in green, and it knocks him back too. And it's just, they're using the white lines. There's even a POW caption or whatever you want to call it, sound effect there. And again, like I was talking about earlier, those white lines show the speed, and they show the motion, they show the force, and it's just beautiful. Like, I think I laughed. I turned to my wife and I laughed, and I showed her, I had to show her, like, I said, look at this, look at how crazy this is. And I love the energy of the comic. And again, it's propaganda. I don't care, man. It made me want to go, find, actually, I know a German person. When she gets here to work, I might just be mean to her. I'm kidding, of course. But it was that effective that I really felt, the power of this artwork and the storyline. And I think it's kind of an easy formula. Set these guys up to be really evil, show them as inhuman, make them do these terrible, terrible things, and then you get this strong, tall, good-looking guy to go and bash them around in retribution for these evil deeds that they're doing. And man, I really get it. It was really effective and powerful, and I really liked it. There's just so many great scenes of violence. I mean the use of force that Cap gets to dish out on these guys as an agent of the state and all these different things is it's really a delight to watch, especially because these guys are so wicked. And I'm not quite sure what else to say other than, again, this comic book was very, very effective. It was extremely entertaining. I think you got a glimpse of one beautiful woman in every comic. It wasn't a big deal. You got to see the camaraderie between Cap and Bucky. And there's this weird thing about them kind of keeping a secret identity. Although it's interesting, I think it's Admiral Perkins is the guy that they're directly under the command of in the first issue. I should say the first story. I think he ends up getting killed in the second story, and it's not really addressed. And then they just have whoever their commanding officer is at their base dealing with them, and it's a little bit strange. There's a little bit of lack of consequence or lack of follow through on some things that didn't quite make sense to me. But I don't know if that's just a style of the writing at the time or if that was a big flaw in the writing. One thing is, it's interesting to me, the Red Skull, spoiler, he dies. He's killed, he ends up killing himself accidentally, and there's this really weird panel, it's almost the last panel of the book, where Bucky says something to Cap like, hey, if you saw that he was going to die, why didn't you stop him from killing himself? And Cap just says, I'm not talking, Bucky. And then I think he jumps out a window, and then they run away, and he calls the FBI. Hey, we've got these dead bodies. We've got this Red Skull. We've got, whatever. Come check it out. Yeah, the general is dead, sadly. But we don't really understand why Cap wasn't saying anything. Why Bucky challenged him. And I don't know if that was like an editing error. If Cap should have said like, well, he deserved to die, so I thought, why not just let him die? He's a bad guy. He's a traitor to America, so I'm fine with him killing himself. And, he's free to do that or whatever. I don't know. Or if maybe there just wasn't enough room, and if maybe the thought balloon was there, the drawing was there, and, Bucky looked a little bugged, but Cap looked very stoic, or there was no real expression. So they just had to throw something in there. And I'm not talking is a good way to end things and to just close out the issue pretty quickly without having to go into anything or explain anything, because while I enjoyed this very much, I admit that it's not perfect. I was roasting the art in the beginning, some of it, and it's very possible that these imperfect humans who made this comic just wrote themselves into a corner and just had to end it. So they did, and it's kind of weird. But I know, it's okay. I think, to me, it feels like a seed planted to talk about some of the darker elements in Captain America, in, the war propaganda stuff. And I think it's kind of it unintentionally makes a seed, or plants a seed that can sprout later in some of Captain America's alleged wokeness that I've heard about, that I haven't really seen in the comics because I haven't read enough Captain American comic books. So I'm also interested in continuing to read him and see what he was like in the 40s when he was a propaganda piece, and what he is like in the more modern interpretations, and then even 20 years later when he becomes part of the Avengers, what will he be like? It'll be interesting to see how exactly he reflects on that time in the war. And I don't think I'm going to read like all of the old Captain America, but if there's like 10 of them, I'll probably read them. But we have to wait and find out. A quick question. How many people did Cap and Bucky attack who were just saying nasty things? Oh, none? They only attacked people who were actually doing evil acts and who had turned their terrible rhetoric into deadly and destructive action? Interesting. Much like Cap, I've done enough talking, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Thanks for sticking with me. Check out mjmunoz.com for more of my work. I'm an aspiring author who will gladly accept your financial support through coffee. Or you can buy merch from my Redbubble store. I've got a great shirt, one that says question everything, one that says Epstein did not kill himself. So you can check those out, and other stuff. Swinging Through Comics can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and mjmunoz.com/STC. Relevant links are in the show notes. If you had a good time, like and share this. Subscribe and ring that bell to catch me next time I'm Swinging Through Comics.